to the context of food. One of the things we continuously hear is that India has had this green revolution, which has allowed it to be a food producer, surplus, exporter, everything else. But that's seen as not sustainable, and hence the need to develop new methods, including genetically modified foods. What's your long sort of view on the whole issue of feeding India's population?
Well, we have to first clearly understand the reasons behind whatever India is claiming as food self-reliance. After it became free, food shortages before freedom was mainly because land was used for non-food crops by the colonialists. Crops which were necessary to supply raw materials to their industries. And after freedom, the land policy changed mainly because of the abolition of zamindari and introduction of land reforms. That was the main reason for the food self-reliance of India, not so-called miracle seeds introduced by the Green Revolution technology. Maybe it contributed a little, but that was not the major reason. So now we know that the first Green Revolution technology has become stagnant and it is failing. That makes us look for alternatives. And an alternative which is fundamentally different than the first Green Revolution technology. A technology which will not repeat the same things which have resulted in the stagnation in production. And production in most of the cases, most of the states, has been coming down for the past 5-6 years. A kind of technology which will not damage soil fertility. A kind of technology which will not increase plant diseases. A kind of technology which will not damage biodiversity and introduce monocultures. This can be an alternative.
But are you saying that the whole Green Revolution, quote unquote, was not really a boon for India? That wasn't the secret to India's success? Because frequently we've talked to people who say that they remember vividly in the late 50s and the early mid-60s, even late 60s, the tremendous food shortages in this country.
Well, very few go into these facts that Green Revolution technology was introduced, say, in 1965, and at that time not even 10% of the total cultivated land was irrigated. And the contribution made by 90% rain-fed farmers was the most significant contribution in achieving self-reliance. Even today, that is the truth. But what happens is that whatever production figures that come out of these river water irrigated areas, which have become so-called Green Revolution areas, get publicity, and the contribution made by rain-fed farmers doesn't get the same kind of publicity. But even now, even today, more than 60% of food contribution is from rain-fed areas. Even today, 80% of the land in India is rain-fed. And in most of the areas, it is traditional farming methods with traditional seeds. And there we have to search for alternatives. Not technologies which will repeat monocultures. Not technologies which are chemical intensive.
So you think that the contribution of such things as dwarf crops, excuse me, dwarf rice, and these abundant yielding strains that were developed, the whole Borlaug Swaminathan revolution, as it's called, are inflated in your mind?
Definitely yes. Because we have cases where even with natural farming, farmers have taken better yields than the Green Revolution varieties, the so-called high-yielding varieties.
So the droughts and things that were happening in the 60s were because of weather problems as opposed to anything?
No, definitely not. The famines in India were not because of drought.
I'm talking about post-independence, not pre-independence.
Yeah, post-independence may be some natural vagaries.
So the picture has been distorted in your mind and made too sunshiny about India's surpluses and what was responsible for them.
Surpluses? Where do we have surpluses?
What are they?
We say we have a surplus by keeping 50% of the population below the poverty line. That is the surplus. We are not a surplus country as far as food production is concerned.
So this country should not be exporting food?
Definitely not.
Because it cannot adequately feed its own population?
Its own population, yes.
So, moving forward a few years, we're in an age now where you have multinational companies who have come in with with seeds that are purported to be, the salvation, for stagnant production. What's your general reaction to that? Because the model that we're presented are the abundant fields that one sees in the West. These can be replicated here. They're the same seeds.
Well, you can as well go to the trial fields that have been there for the past 3 years, at least in my state, Karnataka, and know about the experience of these farmers who tried these so-called new seeds, so the second Green Revolution technology, genetically modified varieties. B.T.Cotton, for example, was tried, is being tried in Karnataka for the past 3 years. And we don't see any of the claims in the trial fields, claims made by these so-called seed companies. Even the growth of the plants is not even 50% as good as the traditional varieties. And the pest resistance claimed by BT technology is not to be seen at all. And the heavy use of other pesticides is very much there.
Even in the B.T.Cotton in the
Yes. I'm talking of only B.T.Cotton. That's the only variety that is being tried in Karnataka just now, officially. Surreptitiously, I don't know how many varieties have been introduced.
I heard a statistic yesterday that cotton accounts for about 5% of the land in this country that is used among agricultural lands, but it accounts for 52% of all the fertilizer that is put into.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. That's it.
So, and the context of that comment was we should develop new strains that do not utilize this, and the secret is in the kind of crop that Monsanto has been trial producing, for example.
Definitely yes. Well, we should try to rely more on the traditional varieties, the indigenous varieties, which have adapted themselves to the local agroclimatic conditions for centuries. And they cannot be replaced by a kind of monoculture globally. The B.T.Cotton that is being tried in, say, Mississippi cannot be tried in Karnataka. There have been crop failures. Even you find pests which are supposed to be eliminated by this Bt toxin. They were very much there. And our information is that bollworm is becoming the biggest pest in the United States also, because it has developed resistance very soon.
Do you think India can feed itself? I mean, the way trends are going, I mean, to the extent that it does even now.
Well, definitely yes. With the kind of, the extent of agricultural land we have, it all depends on how we use that land. Growing food instead of growing non-food crops, so-called commercial crops.
Let me ask you to list the consequences of the Green Revolution in terms of feeding, in terms of the environmental consequences once again. I mean, what has the Green Revolution cost Indian society and India as a whole?
Well, it has damaged Indian agriculture to quite an extent. In the sense, if you work out the economics properly, economics of soil degradation, economics of increasing plant diseases, loss of biodiversity, well, it becomes very clear that it's a losing proposition.
It's not sustainable.
It's definitely not sustainable. It's finished. The first Green Revolution era is over. The dream is over. You have to stop using these so-called first Green Revolution varieties because it's useless.
Given the fact, this may be, a lesser of two evils situation by the logic that you're talking about, but are we not looking now, with soils degraded, at a requirement that new strains be developed that would be disease resistant? And is it not worthwhile looking into the field of genetic modification to develop new kinds of chickpeas, new kinds of peanuts, and other staples, so that, in other words, is India not sort of inexorably committed to depending on high technology because it started with step one, the Green Revolution?
Yeah, well, if we are committed a blunder once, it doesn't mean that we should continue with the second blunder. Well, we have to look for...
I guess if I could rephrase the question, sir, I mean, is there a mechanism outside of genetic modification and new kinds of plant species or new disease-resistant strains? Is there an alternative to that, to repairing some of the damage that you say has happened, from the first Green Revolution?
Well, that is what is necessary now. Our scientists should understand what these traditional varieties were. The traditional varieties or the indigenous varieties which were handed over to us by our forefathers were not only disease resistant but drought resistant also. That's why I say they were they had adjusted themselves to the respective agroclimatic conditions in such a way that there was no crop failure at all. And we have to do some more research into that. And that kind of research has not gone on. For example, in India, agricultural research for the past 40 years has been only towards Green Revolution varieties. And no research has been done on the rain-fed varieties that's grown in 80% of the land even now. That's what has to be done. And of course, there has been efforts by environmentalists and organic farmers conducting research by themselves and finding out solutions, and which we call as lighthouses. There have been, the lighthouses are increasing now.
But do you think that the traditional methods, which may have worked well in centuries past, can feed 1 billion people? Can it have yields that would feed 1 billion people?
Definitely yes. When we have cases to show you that the yields are much higher than the so-called high-yielding varieties. You need not have any doubts about our capacity to feed them through traditional agricultural methods.
Do you see that as being a political reality in current day India, which is striding toward globalization and all of those, the essential market forces that we're talking about, globally? I mean, is what you're proposing feasible in a realistic sense?
Well, particularly in agriculture, globalization as it has been formulated by the World Trade Organization will spell a disaster to the third world agriculture. There is no doubt about it. That's why we have been saying, do whatever you want with other things. Let us see, it doesn't matter. But in the matter of food and agriculture, keep away from it. Take agriculture and food out of the World Trade Organization as it used to be before 1994.
Is that why you're so agitated about the advent of certain companies into this country?
Well, definitely, because these companies destroy the food security and the food sovereignty of all these third world countries.
Expand on that, if you would, please, on how that works.
Well, by establishing seed monopoly first.
You have to buy their seeds.
Yeah, seed monopoly. When they start controlling the seed, they control the farmer. And gradually they control the food grain trade. And when once multinational companies control food grain trade, it means they control the nation.
If one looks at the American precedent, such as it might be, from maybe a century ago, there's been a lot written about the big grain merchants who developed almost monopolies on certain aspects of agriculture. I'm talking about Cargill and other companies like it, ADM. They're still very huge, they're still very influential.
Yeah.
But in the larger scheme of things, do you think that the American economy, the American society has been harmed by them?
Well, definitely. How many farmers have been left in the United States? Now, my information is that 1% of the population of farmers in the United States. So, what did the American policy do to the rest of the farmers who were farming? What happened to those farm families?
Well, I can answer that in part, although I'm not a scholar on it, but typically I live in a farming area in the United States, for example. One generation hurt, the next generation went into newer fields of the economy, whether in computerization, transportation, mostly urban-based. So what you developed were much fewer, much larger farmers.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Can you do the same thing in countries like India?
Consider that a question that I'm asking you.
What do you do with 75% of the population who are in farming? Or your other sectors capable of absorbing them? Where do you send them? Well, of course, you displace them, uproot them from their farms. Where do you send them? The other sectors are as rickety as you can imagine. And they cannot be absorbed in any other sector. So that's why I say globalization, as formulated by the WTO, particularly the Agreement on Agriculture, will result in genocide in India.
That's a very strong word.
See, you can't think of any other word other than that. When a program starts killing people by millions, gradually.
And are you seeing in your crystal ball, I mean, are you seeing as a precursor what you were just reading about from Andhra? Is that a
Definitely
foretaste?
yes. Now you read reports of suicides of farmers in hundreds. But maybe there will be no suicides in such big numbers, but gradual hunger and gradual death. Since 1992, when liberalization policies were introduced in India, the government survey itself says that rural consumption has reduced by 40% from 92 to 96. Can you imagine what it means?
Rural food consumption.
Rural food consumption has been reduced by 40%. And it is much more after the food subsidies have been removed from the public distribution system. What is it then? Isn't it genocide?
This is not a one-generation transition in your mind to something
Definitely not. The same trend continues. Because the kind of discussion you see going on in the World Trade Organization, the trend is not going to change.
So tell us about what happens, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. You were involved in an agitation at the Monsanto.
Sure,
facility.
we have been trying to educate farmers to boycott seed companies like Monsanto, and we have been giving notices to retail seed traders also not to sell these varieties. And that we would take direct action if they try to sell these varieties. Now it's educating the farmers basically about biotechnology, about transgenic seeds, and the surreptitious introduction of terminator seeds also. We have information that terminator seeds are being introduced in third world countries since 1990, surreptitiously.
Tell us about terminator seeds.
Sure, well, this is the kind of technology some of these seed companies have obtained, starting from Delta and Pine from United States, and now, Zeneca has it and Monsanto has it. They have not stopped it, even though they made a public statement saying that they have stopped research on terminator technology. They have not stopped it. They are continuing with it, and our information is that they have been introducing these varieties in third world countries for the past 10 years.
And what do these do exactly, sir? I mean, what do these terminator seeds do?
Sure, well, I don't know where they call it's a technology which produces sterile seeds. The very expression is so funny. A seed cannot be sterile. But, that's what this technology produces, a seed which doesn't germinate for the second time. That's just to make seed dependence on the part of third world farmers.
So that you have to buy new ones every year?
Every year.
I see. So you, this burning, was it the BT crop at Monsanto that was burned?
Yeah, it was only B.T.Cotton crop, because that's the only variety that's being tested in.
So you led the agitation that led to the burning of that field?
Well, our organization, yes.
Yes, and the statement that you wanted to make with that agitation was what?
Well, kick out Monsanto from the country.
And every other multinational.
And every other multinational which tries to introduce this so-called biopollution technology. That's what we have been calling biotechnology. Biotechnology is nothing other than biopollution technology, which will damage the biodiversity of our country.
How strong is the feeling among farmers in this country toward this? I mean, is there a greater awareness?
Well, there were 40 trial fields this year, and 39 are disappointed. And only one, which has been, I would say, bought over by Monsanto, has been giving statements that the yield is very good and there were no pests, etc., etc. But 39, which means 99% of the farmers are unhappy with the new varieties. It's a good thing.
That's a lot of citizens of India. Are they agitated a lot?
Well, farmers particularly have started realizing that this new technology is very dangerous for them. I don't know about the other citizens. I am not very hopeful of the Indian intelligentsia, the urban so-called elite, which I have been calling as resident non-Indians. They are so irresponsible.
Because they don't realize the consequences to the farmers?
No, they are not bothered about these things. They are not even bothered about genetically modified food. They are not bothered about what they are eating. In spite of the fact genetically modified food has already entered India through Orissa.
Let me cite an example. You know, we visited the agriculture college in this city, which is well regarded throughout the world. They are developing, as an example, a variety of melon injected with that will basically contain an anti-rabies vaccine, for example.
Sure.
They are developing a peanut variety that is more disease resistant, for example. This is research being done by Indians for this country. You know, nobody doubts their patriotism. Is that something that you have any problem with, so long as there is no multinational? Is this an indigenous enterprise?
No. Bad science is bad science. Whether it's done by your own scientist or a scientist from abroad, bad science is bad science.
And again,
I don't know whether these agricultural scientists in my city know what happens if the human beings eat that melon. They're not going to that kind of research. They say it's anti-rabies. Okay, fine. What happens to the human system, human physiology, when human beings start eating this kind of melon?
theoretically, they will determine that through scientific trials, phase 1 on mice, phase 2 on dogs.
Complete that research totally.
Mm-hmm. Which is...
Don't try to bring those things to the farmers' fields having scientific uncertainties. This is the discussion that's going on everywhere. This is what I said when I went to the United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development. I told them, well, do whatever you want inside your laboratories, but come to my field only when you don't have any scientific uncertainties. Because more than 300 scientists from nearly 40 countries appealed to the United Nations to put a moratorium on these so-called genetically modified organisms. And that's the reason why most of the countries have put a moratorium on environmental tests of these genetically modified varieties. And I'm happy to tell you that last week, Thailand government has put a stop to GMO trials in Thailand.
But if these two gentlemen with whom we spoke, eminent scientists, were to come to you 10 years from now and show you research that showed benefits from, say, this melon or from this peanut, taken from enclosed, facilities, would you be amenable to their widespread use?
We are not opposed to science.
So your argument is with the process by which it is being accelerated into the marketplace?
Yes, science as such. We are not opposed to science, but we are opposed to bad science.
So your definition of bad in this case is not bad in theory, it's bad in application because of market pressures.
No, see, when it becomes, no, not market. Talking as a scientist.
Yes.
I am also bothered about what implications it will have on the health of the consumer, on the health of the human beings, health of the livestock.
Right.
See, and researchers have been going on all over the world about the effect of genetically modified food on human and animal health. And there have been findings that it is quite dangerous. It takes humans and animals to the stage of having AIDS without sex, removing all kinds of resistance in the human system. Accept it. That's the reason why genetically modified varieties are losing market throughout the world. Japan has stopped importing genetically modified soya, and many countries have stopped importing genetically modified corn from the United States, and the market is going down.
Right.
That's because consumers are getting convinced about what the scientists are saying.
There you go, Pete.
You're wrong.
So, do you think India should be investigating this? I mean, is what these scientists are doing in Bangalore and in other scientific centers in this country worthwhile research?
Well, I don't mind.
Do you mind your tax rupees being spent on these sorts of research enterprises?
Well, that way we have been wasting a lot of tax money on useless research. For that matter, our own university, which you said is a renowned university, the research that has gone on for the past 40 years has been only on green revolution technology and nothing else.
Not honoring the heritage of farmers in this country?
No, not research that was necessary for this country. They should have done research more on the 80% cultivating area where traditional crops are being grown, and they should have done some more research on short-term varieties in this dry land agriculture.
Do you understand the concern or the motivation, the urgency that might be behind some of this embrace of modern technology when you consider the population pressures in India? 1 billion people.
Okay, well, that you have to change your agricultural policy, your policy of land use. You can change the crop pattern. The so-called commercial crops are there because of your price policy. Change your price policy so that the farmers start growing food only. Don't grow cotton for export. Grow food for internal consumption. Mm-hmm. You have to change your price policy, you have to change your agricultural policy, credit policy, etc. And that's what is needed urgently, not bad science.
This may be slightly off your targeted study areas, but just as a citizen in general, I mean, do you fret about the population pressures? Give us some insight into
Oh, definitely. Well,
what might change that.
No, at least we should, in India, achieve zero growth as soon as possible.
You know, from the perspective of someone who represents farmers and rural people, where there is a lot of growth, where the fertility rate is very high, you know, what are the fundamental problems with population that need to change before people...
Well, it's a very, very, very old argument which has been going on, you know, whether population leads to poverty or poverty leads to population boom. And I'm convinced it's poverty which leads to population boom. You have to eradicate poverty, you have to eradicate illiteracy to check population growth, and that's what has to be done. And it should be done very urgently.
Final question that I have has to do with China, which, as you know, has tightly embraced modern technology, modernity in general. Their trade with the Western world is many, many times India's, for example, in total volume. Is China a role model for India to follow in any of these spheres toward development?
Definitely not. It's committing a blunder just like India. And we know that it is embracing modern technology even in agriculture. And it's changing its food habits, traditional food habits also. And it has already become a food importing country. And in another 10 years, there will be a big question, which was asked by somebody else earlier: who will feed China? And the figures show that the entire production of the United States will not be enough only for China in another 20 years.
And you believe that?
I believe it. Because there will be 1,500 million people by 2010. And you cannot buy imported food for all the population, because you are now diverting all your food grains to industry, cattle feed, making beer, poultry, things like that. Because of the change in the food habits of Chinese and the diversion of food grains to industries producing meat and beer, things like that, well, very soon China will be one of the biggest food importing countries. And I'm sure China cannot feed its people with imported food.
At the moment, China's children are healthier than India's. They are being reproduced at a lower rate than India's. The per capita income is higher in China. Every statistic is much more favorable in China's favor.
Yeah, definitely yes, because it had some kind of a real socialist system where there was kind of equitable distribution compared to India. And of course, you know Nehru's socialism. The answer is which I gave you just now.
It won't
because
last.
it was the poverty was not there in China, and literacy was achieved very fast. That's the reason for the control of population growth by people themselves. You don't need to have a population control program, but you still need it in India because of poverty and illiteracy.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Professor?
Well, leave nature alone. Don't introduce bad science anymore to damage nature.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We'll hold you there for just a... Okay. You got audio still going on this?
Yeah, if you like.
Yeah, just keep it rolling. I was just, again, as I said, telling you that I first heard your commentaries on the radio in the United States, and this thing about Kargil and murderers. Do you still feel that Kargil are murderers?
Oh, definitely yes. No, I can give you a story from 2 years ago. They sold sorghum seeds to 30,000 farmers in Bellary, in my state. The crops came up. There were ear heads also, no grain. There was no grain at all. And the economy of those 30,000 families was totally destroyed. What do you call them?
Well,
And now they say that the technology was not totally developed.
but the choice of the word murderer was curious, though.
Well, what else is it? Knowing very well that the technology is not fully developed, trying to make a farmer invest his life. Actually, farmers invest their life when they try to grow a crop.
Right. So you could not find anything worse than that to call them.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. I don't remember having said that, but because you tell me that I said it, maybe I've said it. Because I don't remember those things.
Yeah. Okay. You got
But
that.
what else is it? And that's what is being done now. Is look at these cotton farmers. For example, 2 years ago in Karnataka, farmers were given these B.T. cotton seeds. They were not informed that they were B.T. cotton. Even the local agricultural department was not informed that it was B.T. cotton. The farmer was only told that it was a high-yielding variety. Why should they do all these things?
How many farmers were given?
Well, even 2 years ago there were 14 trial fields in Karnataka. 40 in India totally, but 14 in Karnataka.
Show us that bag of cotton. Was this plucked
Yeah.
after the agitation?
Yeah.
Okay. And what are we
While in
looking
the
at?
presence of the police, to show how it is being infested by bollworms like this. You see how many holes are there? Holes all
So
around.
these little
These are all
holes
bollworms.
are
Yes.
essentially the pest,
Yes,
renders the crop useless.
yes.
And this is
And this is supposed to be B.T. cotton, where Bacillus thuringiensis toxin will kill the bollworm as soon as it eats any part of the plant.
Are you certain that you got it from a place that was supposed to have this variety?
Yes, we picked this up in the presence of the police.
This is from Monsanto's field.
From Monsanto's fields. Almost everywhere. In spite of the fact that there was a refuge plot. You know, they ask you to leave a refuge plot for the bollworm to go there instead of coming here. If the BT toxin is effective, why do you need a refuge? It's just like opening a 5-star restaurant for bollworms, asking them to go there.
That's a lovely analogy.
Yeah, what else is it?